Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, a show about India's role in the world, India's major relationships, India's key partnerships, and how India builds thick networks of links with countries around the world, and the kind of benefits that it generates both for India and for the partner nations and for the regions in which they are respectively located. This show is all about India's outlook and its approach to the world. In this episode, we are taking up a country that's very, very central to India's geostrategy and economic progress. This is Australia. We are going down under and looking at all aspects of the India-Australia comprehensive strategic partnership. Viewers, there was a time when Australia and India were known only for the 3 C's: curry, cricket and Commonwealth. But it's moved far beyond these historical legacies. There is a strong legacy of the past, but much more contemporary dynamism to this relationship. So much so that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that there was a time when Australia was in the periphery, but now it is in the center of our thoughts. And taking us forward on this journey to understand India-Australia relations, I am really privileged to introduce you to our studio guest, Professor Amitabh Mattu. Professor Amitabh Mattu is the founder director of the Australia-India Institute at the University of Melbourne, a professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University, one of the leading public intellectuals of the country, someone who has lived in Australia and has seen this relationship blossom and come to this stage. Professor Mattu, so grateful that you have joined me today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor and a privilege to be here.
Professor Mattu, when we talk of Australia, there's history, right? The legacy. And I'd like you to start with that and talk about how it has evolved. And clearly, the last 10 years has been very dynamic and it's booming. But there was a time when we were somewhat indifferent or, steady, but nothing big was happening. So you would like us to take the audience through this journey, you know?
Yeah, Professor Cholia, if you look at the last century, you'll notice that India's relations with Australia were very difficult. In fact, there was very little truck between India and Australia. We were on different sides of the Cold War. Australia had a white Australia policy, which many people suspected within India, and rightly so, was almost based on a kind of racial sense. Similarly, India followed autarkic economic policies, was not aligned to the Soviet Union, but was partial to the Soviet Union, while Australia was part of the military alliance with the United States. Australia has always identified in that century with the Anglo-Saxon bloc. So because of all this, there was really little that was happening between India and Australia by way of trade, by way of strategic partnership, by way of even people-to-people links. If you notice that the immigration was slow, not like the immigration of Indians to Canada or North America. But this has transformed. There's one relationship which has really, as you said, blossomed and shown great prospects, not just today, but for the future. It is a relationship between Canberra and New Delhi. And primarily because now there's a recognition that there is a convergence of both values and interests. You and I know, as students of international relations, that we would like the world to be run on the basis of values and ideas, and especially if there's a convergence. But unfortunately, sometimes realism and realpolitik determines that your interests can be different. But with India and Australia, both are robust multicultural democracies. Both today are open economies, and both see a danger to present stability in the Indo-Pacific because of hegemonic designs of one great power in this region, which is China.
Yep.
So it's common threats, common interests, common values. Nothing can be stronger when a relationship is built on these 3 pillars.
Great. So viewers, the thing is, these common interests and values have really revved up the relationship to a higher level, and they have brought us to a stage where we call it a comprehensive strategic partnership. And this kind of relationship, we have very few. Actually, India, we can count on fingertips countries we call comprehensive strategic partners, and we did that in 2020. So, Professor Mattu, your thoughts on this, upgrade that we have done at the diplomatic level? clearly recognizing these ideas, but it is a rediscovery in many ways, right? Because we had somewhat been indifferent, but now that's happened. So clearly it's a step in the right direction. Prime Minister Modi was the first Indian leader to visit Australia in 28 years when he went there in 2014. So there had been some neglect in the past, but now we are trying to address it, and that's a big change.
See, there was a difference of perceptions. Indians didn't understand Australia. They saw Australia through the image of the White Australia policy, and Australians couldn't do business with India. They found India difficult as a country. And as I said, because of these misperceptions, you often had incidents which derailed the relationship.
Right.
Now, every relationship has problems, every partnership has ups and downs, but the strength of a partnership is often determined by the bandwidth and the ability to be resilient even when there are problems. But in India and Australia's case, if you remember, Professor Chaulia, that when India tested nuclear weapons in 1998, the Shakti nuclear tests, the most electrifying, provocative reaction was from Australia.
Yes.
So much so that Indian military officials who were at their higher defense colleges were declared persona non grata, and they had to leave almost immediately.
And now, sir, we've come such a long way since then. Australia has agreed to provide us uranium. So that's a big
That was a
shift.
key decision when when Australia recognized, after the, of course, the Indo-US nuclear deal, that India is special. That India
India is
despite the fact that it's not signed the NPT, has behaved in an exemplary way in terms of its proliferation record, and that because it is the world's largest democracy, you need to invest in India, which will become more capable. So that decision.
It's a belated but a very important change in Australian approach, and we have also changed. Let's listen into this exclusive video statement from our High Commissioner in Canberra, Ambassador Manpreet Vohra, and then take the discussion forward.
The transformation of our relations, first into a strategic partnership in 2009, and then elevated quite rapidly to a comprehensive strategic partnership in June 2020, has been nothing short of remarkable. There are good reasons for this reappraisal and fresh discovery by each country of the value of the other, and of the win-win proposition for both through closer collaboration and greater interdependence. This realization has translated into working together in new and multiple domains, from traditional security to contemporary challenges to futuristic technologies. In turn, those closer and more frequent interactions have led to an ever higher degree of trust, confidence, and mutual understanding. They have also forged close personal friendships among leaders and ministers and senior officials. This now permits even more candid and more frequent exchange of views and ideas, and a comfort level that is allowing the carving of new, even path-breaking agreements and arrangements between us. This is a very virtuous circle in action. As I said, there are several reasons that have brought India and Australia closer together. The rapidly growing Indian diaspora in Australia, almost 7.5 lakh today, a big student community, impressive tourist numbers, at least pre-COVID, and solid sporting links have meant that people-to-people ties are strong, expanding, and serving as living bridges to bring our two countries together. Another factor is economic. Our trade has grown quite rapidly to over $20 billion per annum on average. And for Australia, India is today its 7th largest trading partner and a major destination for exports of its mineral and metal resources. But it has to be said that trade remains well below potential, investments remain modest, and much, much more is possible. Both governments have examined and acknowledged this economic logic. We are therefore negotiating an ambitious and well-balanced comprehensive economic cooperation agreement, or FTA, Free Trade Agreement in common parlance. I'm confident that we will have one in place soon, and it will be of a kind that may well serve as a model for what India can achieve with other important countries. An emerging or sunrise area is critical minerals. India needs an assured, large-scale, long-term supply of these critical minerals and rare earths for our ambitious e-mobility and clean energy programs. And Australia is among the largest producer and exporter of many of these. We can not only tie up long-term offtake arrangements, but also create enduring value chains by integrating Australian companies with end manufacturers in India of cells and batteries and permanent magnets. The Quad itself has served well to raise the profile of India and Australia individually and appreciation for what we can do together, working also with Japan and the United States for a more secure, inclusive, rules-based, transparent, and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. In closing, let me say that the various political, strategic, and economic pillars of the India-Australia relationship have matured quite rapidly, and bilateral relations have perhaps never been better.
There you go, viewers. So, Ambassador Vohra listing a number of areas where Australia and India are now looking forward with great hope and expectations. Professor Mattu, the economic aspect is of course quite central, and an important point made by Ambassador Vohra was that the potential is enormous. 20 billion is big, but it could be a far bigger, and the projections are with the comprehensive economic cooperation agreement it may go multiple fold and bring dividends to both sides. But of course there are protectionist barriers and concerns on both sides. So how do you see that aspect going? I mean, for obviously from the Australian point of view, India, the big, fast-growing market, 400, 500 million middle class or even bigger, that's something that's been, they've been wanting to have a greater share of the pie. So how is that going?
Professor Chawla, quite clearly it's an asymmetrical situation. I mean, India is amongst the largest markets in the world. Australia has a small manufacturing base, but in terms of minerals, rare earths, also many finished and value-added products in agriculture and oil seeds, it has a competitive advantage. Now, clearly, India's manufacturers, India's traditional lobbies wouldn't like an asymmetrical arrangement in favor of Australia. But sometimes you require a political imprimatur to ensure that at least a beginning can be made. Now, in the case of Australia, they appointed a special envoy, Mr. Tony Abbott, who was a former Prime Minister, to come and help negotiate the deal. And I am told that now, under the leadership of Minister Suresh Prabhu and Dan Tehan, from the Australian side, we have what some people describe as an interim FTA almost ready.
Early harvest.
Yeah, what they used to call an early harvest, now they call it interim comprehensive economic cooperation agreement, and in fact, within weeks, we could see that happening. Now, obviously, what happens with an early harvest is that you get a small amount of produce, you get an agreement on at least a minimal set of goods, but you still have a long negative list. What is important is not to let the momentum die. Once you get an early FTA or an early CCA, then work so that you have a much more comprehensive arrangement in place.
And Professor Mattu, the point Ambassador Vohra was also making about one of the cutting edge fields is rare earths and critical minerals, and with the Chinese monopoly on these, many of us have been spooked by the potential that our industrialization and our modernization will be stymied. So that's where Australia comes in with 7 to 10% of rare earths in the world, which is with Australia, and we would like to take that forward because that is big for Make in India here and for Prime Minister Modi's vision for industrialization in India.
See, Australia has often been described as a lucky country. It's got a small population, a land area 1.5 times the size of India, and a repository of the world's rarest minerals and also coal and uranium and gold. But what is important is to take advantage. The Chinese took advantage of it, and the Chinese economy has really prospered on the basis of the exports of minerals from Australia. We can take advantage of that. You know, even today, ironically, however, that despite our attempts at decoupling our economic relationship to an extent from China, both for Australia and for India, the largest trading partner remains China. So we need to now work much more. For instance, within the Quad mechanism, now there's talk about India producing 1 billion vaccines, which will supply the Quad countries and beyond. Now, it's critical that we, with single-minded sense of purpose, work towards diversifying our supply chains. Because unless we do that, the economic levers that China has, and they're already weaponizing interdependence on them in nuanced ways, but even on our region, the kind of debt trap that Sri Lanka has got into, for instance. And Australia can be a reliable partner, and Australia is now bullish on India. What needs to be done, however, is that Australian businesses have to be convinced that it's going to be easy doing business with India.
Our rankings have improved. Confidence is growing about Indian economy.
And in some ways, this actually works with the vision of the Prime Minister Modi of an Atmanirbhar Bharat, because even while you source your minerals, you source the best technologies, the building block will remain India. It will be the base through which you can actually ensure a self-reliance not in an autarkic fashion, but a self-reliance so that you can become the manufacturing base for the whole world in some
Australia
ways.
is going to be a crucial partner for us in this journey. Professor Mattu, you and I are both in education. Australia exporter of education, you know, it's the largest exporter of education, one of the biggest to India, and we send you know, lakhs of students to Australia, and it's become a major destination after the US. If there's one country that's captured the imagination of young Indians to want to go for higher studies, it's Australia, and you've taught in Australian universities. This is where, you know, really the synergy has come together, right? And this is part of the trade. Sometimes people don't realize, because Indian students go and pay tuition in Australian universities, and that's seen as part of the annual bilateral trade. So your thoughts on the education relationship and how it's really zoomed?
Till COVID happened, unfortunately because of COVID there has been a bit of a setback, but I am confident that that setback will be overcome. Australia was one of, as you pointed out, preferred destinations for Indian students, because the quality of Australian education, now Australia has only about 40 to 45 universities, including a small private sector. Most of these are public universities. Most of them, or a large percentage of them, rank in the Times
top
TLS
50,
index,
top 100,
or top 100, top 500. Melbourne University, where I continue to teach, where I'm a honorary professor, has been ranked between 30 and 40, and so has ANU, and so has Monash. Now, given the quality of education, and given that the Australian dollar is competitive, because you can get much cheaper education in Australia compared to the Ivy Leagues, and they have also ensured that there are for the number of years that you spent studying there, you'll get a proportion of that to be able to work in Australia, and they're looking for skilled workers. India is the largest source of skilled migrants in any case. I think we can have a comprehensive relationship which recognizes that there are complementarities. Australia is in need for manpower, Australia is in need for research students of high quality, and they're now offering scholarships almost similar to the kind of scholarships that UK and the United States offer. So it's a win-win.
Super growth story. Viewers, India-Australia educational partnership, really a role model. But there are also other things we are doing with Australia. There's a big geostrategic partnership. Professor Mattu already alluded to that. And let's hear from the top ministers of the two countries, our External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and the Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne, about what is driving this strategic cooperation between the two countries. Let's have a look.
India-Australia relations have experienced unprecedented momentum in the last 7 years. There have been frequent engagements despite the pandemic in a range of areas. New mechanisms have come up reflecting new energies. our people-to-people contact has added a unique dimension to this relationship through the flow of talent, ideas, education, and tourism. Today, as the four ministers come together for the first time, we discussed our experiences and further collaboration in responding to the COVID-19 challenges. Decentralized globalization, strategic autonomy, and a sharper sense of national security are some of the relevant outcomes. We also underlined our commitment to creating secure and resilient global supply chains. We welcomed the renewed vigor with which both sides are now engaging on trade issues to fully expedite the complementarities between us. As has been stated by Raksha Mantriji, we have had some significant progress in our defense cooperation framework, and we have set out an ambitious framework to further enhance our cooperation. The 2+2 dialogue reflects the comfort that we have attained in our bilateral relationship, especially in strategic and security spheres, based on the growing convergences with Australia on the security issues and a shared commitment to a free, open, prosperous, and rules-based Indo-Pacific region. The peaceful development of the Indo-Pacific has been a focus of our relationship. Our two countries believe that it should be shaped by a participative and collaborative manner. We reiterated our commitment to continue to work together for peace, stability, prosperity of all countries in the region. This would include a rules-based international order, freedom of navigation in international waters, promoting connectivity, as well as respecting the territorial integrity and sovereignty of all states. During the 2+2 dialogue, we also exchanged views on developments in our neighboring regions. Afghanistan was understandably a major subject of discussion. We agreed that the international community must be united in its approach, guided by UN Security Council Resolution 2593. As members of the Quad, we recognize the importance of plurilateralism in a multipolar and rebalanced world. We appreciate the value of our trilaterals with Japan, France, and Indonesia, and will hold these dialogues soon.
We are not against anything. We're about building confidence and resilience, about promoting a region in which all countries are able to be and feel sovereign and secure without the threat of coercion or intimidation. We have a really practical agenda, which is evidenced by our support of access to vaccines, indeed over 500 million vaccines delivered under the Quad leaders' commitments on vaccination. We've talked at great length, both in our bilaterals and in our Quad meeting yesterday, about the work that we are able to do together on infrastructure development, on cyber security, which again we've reinforced today in our bilateral meeting, on countering malicious and dangerous disinformation. And for Australia, the Quad is a very complementary part of the network of relationships that we have both regionally and internationally. And it is all about helping to positively shape our region as indeed it develops and grows. And Australia has welcomed the development and growth of China over the years, but we have always said that we will also act in protection of our national interests as any sovereign nation would.
So viewers, both the ministers emphasizing territorial integrity, sovereignty, respect for smaller countries, respect for rules, maritime order, and open sea lanes of communication, such things. So Professor Mattu, this has of course become the major new development in the strategic partnership. The Quad, both are core members, and increasingly the concern about Chinese aggression and expansionism is quite there. But on the other hand, Minister Payne was also talking about the positive agenda. It's not just that India and Australia are coming together simply to check China, but there's much more that we're doing for the whole region. We talked about a trilateral with Indonesia. There was one with France, which has unfortunately gone off track. But the Pacific Island nations, ASEAN, all of these, India, Australia together seem to be want to shore up these regional groupings. So your thoughts on the geopolitical cement that is taking India-Australia ties to such heights?
Professor, the two parts of this new geostrategic alignment or relationship. One is that the best guarantee against hegemony is building your own capacities. On your own, unilaterally, but also in partnership. And that's what Minister Jaishankar and Minister Marise Payne have often emphasized, that when you build your own capacities, whether it's in terms of maritime exercises, whether it's in terms of interoperability of the armed forces, or whether it is in terms of more resilient supply chains, more diversified and resilient supply chains, you're building a positive agenda, or whether it's in terms of actually manufacturing the world's largest number of vaccines. But within that positive agenda, you also build a capacity which can ensure that your dependence on countries which have a potentially adversarial side to them and can be checked. And that also requires that you recognize that hegemony of Chinese ambitions of hegemony are getting more and more aggressive as Xi Jinping sees himself as this new leader of this new China which wants to dominate at least the Indo-Pacific region. Of course, he's being helped by the fact that American energies are now concentrated in Europe. But how do you actually contain China? I'm using the word contain, without necessarily making that the backbone of your policies.
And as middle powers, Australia and India
and absolutely
will team up.
Also, but you don't want to be seen as just an alliance against China. The Chinese would like to project, oh, this is a gang up against us. That's what they've been doing. What you need to do is emphasize the positives while recognizing that this is the best guarantee against threats from belligerent, revisionist powers like China.
And Professor Mattu, the trilaterals and the trying with the whole region, I mean, Australia historically had a big influence in the Pacific and in Southeast Asia with Indonesia especially. We have an Act East policy. They have had a Look West kind of an approach, and these two seem to be intersecting here.
It's intersecting. For instance, they have entered into an AUKUS relationship with the United Kingdom and the United States, which is based on a larger kind of Anglo-Saxon attachment. We have a special relationship with the United States, so that's not to the exclusion of other relationships. We are building other relationships within the larger neighborhood, whether it's BIMSTEC or other formations. But what you need to recognize that Quad as it exists today is the most potent instrument against potential Chinese designs in this region. It was not always so. We've been lukewarm about the Quad. The Australians have been lukewarm about the Quad because their relationship with China was one of great dependence. But unfortunately, we lost time. But at least we have actually now grasped this opportunity, because if we don't grasp this opportunity and ensure that we work with the momentum on all sectors, it's not just maritime exercises or only in terms of coordinating your strategies. Cooperation is about learning. Ultimately, once you learn how to cooperate, you build the capacity. That's why you need to do it across the board, across the spectrum of issues.
Points well taken, Professor Mattu. Thank you so much for joining us in this episode on and throwing light on the special nature of India-Australia relations. Thank you, viewers, for watching. Australia matters to India, and India is increasingly mattering to Australia. This rediscovery process has become huge, and it has ramifications not just bilaterally but for public good in the across the Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific itself is a term that the Australians first popularized, and now it has caught on, and we are very much on board with this. So let's watch how the Indo-Pacific is shaped by this special relationship as well as its extensions as we go forward. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Professor Mattu.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Much appreciated. We'll see you again with another episode of Indian Diplomacy with another country that matters a lot to India. Take care.